Well, hello everyone. My name is Chad Hertler. I serve as pastor of Highland Crest here in Green Bay, and I'm joined by two dear friends this morning here to be able to talk about, I'll call it race, cops, and the gospel. Joined on my right is Roemon. He's been a part of our church for over 10 years, right? He is a dear friend. He has planted his life here at Highland Crest, and whenever there is an event going on, usually him and his family are here. He has a wonderful wife, a daughter, and two sons. And to tell you how much trust I have for him, that when I am gone, more often than not, Roemon fills the pulpit for me. So that is a huge measure of trust for a gospel preaching pastor to offer his pulpit. And so Roemon has instant credibility for us. We love him, and we appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, brother.
And then on my left is another man that I've known for at least 10 years or so, Drew, a great friend. In both of these guys, I've had meals with them more than one occasion. When I think of you, I think of Elk Burger at Titletown Brewery. And when I think of you, I think of pancakes and sausage at Julie's. But Drew is a member of the Green Bay Police Department. And how many years, brother?
13.
13 years as well. And so I could say, and this is just the absolute truth, I would trust my life in both of these men's hands. And we're just privileged today. We want to be able to take some time to speak about some of the issues that are around us today. And this is not going to be a debate. This is among three good friends that love the Lord that just want to offer some perspective. In a way, we want to model what just honest conversation looks like towards these issues. And then we're going to offer just some hope as well as what the Bible, the gospel, provides for us. So just to get right into it, Roemon, I'm going to turn to you. And on Memorial Day, just this back in May, there was a tragic event where George Floyd was, we'd say, murdered. And so why don't you take us through what that was like for you to hear about that and then to view it?
All right. So I saw I was really just scrolling through Facebook and just kind of happened upon it because people were posting the video over and over on a lot of different pages of people that I follow. And I almost didn't watch it, to be honest, because I've seen so many other videos like this, including the recent Ahmaud Arbery video. Regardless of where you sit on the details of that, it was still challenging to watch that one, and ones in the past too. So when I saw this one, I'm like, do I need to really? Should I really do? I really was debating watching it, but I ended up doing it anyway. And my instant feeling was just deep sorrow and grief. I mean, I wailed. I would say I didn't just cry. Mm-hmm. I wailed at seeing that. And because I identify with the brother that was on the ground being of my ethnicity, and I'm going to try to avoid using words like race. And I've said this on some of my posts that I understand that race is a concept that's not biblical, so to speak, that we're all part of the human race. The way we view race in the United States is not really the way that it was intended to be viewed. Mm-hmm. But instead, I try to refer to ethnicity mm-hmm. and culture because that's really what we're talking about. And Paul, he had an affinity and a special love for Hebrews, for other Jews. Mm-hmm. And I think it's okay for us to have a cultural identity and be proud of our ethnicity, no matter what that is. Mm-hmm. And so I saw myself in George Floyd mm-hmm. when I watched that video. I saw a big black man, like myself. I'm a big black man, laying on the ground and having his life extinguished before my eyes. And it hurt me deeply. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, it wasn't even about it being a white cop. If whether people believe that or not, it truly was not for me. about it being a white cop. It was just about an abuse of authority. Powerful over the powerless is what I saw. And it just rocked me. I think that's the best way I can describe my initial reaction to this. And I even posted a video on my page from a pastor who he couldn't even get the words out. He was really just processing what was happening in his raw emotion, and that was exactly how I felt. That's why I wrote I lament, because that's really where I was. I was deeply grieved. So, yeah.
Thanks. And I imagine you watched the same video, and so why don't you take us through, as a police officer, what your take on that?
I think, kind of like Roemon, I had not caught the beginning of this all. The video was introduced to me after people have reached out and asked, have you seen the video? Have you watched it? What's your take on it? Mm-hmm. And like Roemon, as a police officer, people ask me that all the time, and I've seen videos time and time again. And I didn't care to watch it. I didn't want to see it, Not that I want to turn a blind eye, but you're asked to judge somebody from law enforcement in law enforcement. And then I had a family friend that reached out and said, hey, could you just watch it and tell me what you think? And I'll be honest, I turned it on and I couldn't get through that video. I turned it off halfway through. To watch somebody in my job take someone's life, it was rough. It was rough. And then I finished the video, and there's no words for it. But as Roemon said, to watch somebody in authority take someone's life and show no regard. And there's no mitigating circumstances for that officer. There's no mitigating circumstances or aggravating circumstances for the person that's on the ground. That could have been the best person in the world. That could have been the worst person in the world. Nobody should be treated that way. Mm-hmm. And law enforcement's not treated or trained to treat people that way. And that's not an acceptable way to have anybody be. And it did not sit well. I was physically sick watching it, knowing the repercussions, but also knowing that people were going to view this, and this is going to resonate with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. There is an instinct that God has given to us to value life, and there's something we call sanctity of human life, that when it is taken and we observe it, that is an appropriate response for us to grieve over that. And I share that apprehension. I was reluctant to watch it as well. And I'm glad I did to be able to see this and understand a bit of the outrage that has happened since then. Well, let's turn the corner here. And Roemon, one of the ways that you have served your church, and by the way, this video is largely geared towards our local church as well as people within our Green Bay community. These words are not necessarily directed towards people in Washington, D.C. or Minneapolis or even Milwaukee. We're speaking of our local context. And this last week or so, Roemon has really served his church. And I would say the Church of Green Bay, those of you who are friends with him on Facebook, as he has posted comments, reactions, and as well as a variety of sermons and videos, that if you've had a chance to take those in, I think you've been very, very well informed and given perspective. But I do want to take time now and just say, let's just be honest here. I think Green Bay has about 86% that is white, okay? And I think of a time where you and I had lunch once, and I just said, brother, can you tell me what it's like to be a black man, a minority here in Green Bay? And I want to know, as a fish in water, a fish doesn't know it's wet, right? And I don't know that I've ever experienced a second of racism. So I just want to be quiet and you fill in. What is it like for you? And sometimes I think we can be, as people of majority, we can be sensitive to say, I don't want to look stupid and I don't want to ask a question that would be offensive. I don't care. I mean, I'd rather him know that I care about him and I want to be informed, and then just sit back and listen. So why don't you take some time and just share from your perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. As far as Green Bay and policing and racism and the whole ball, there's a lot there. But I'm going to be honest with you. My experience in Green Bay is nowhere near as trying, tragic, whatever you want to call it, as my experience living in Chicago. Growing up in Chicago was totally different than being here. To be honest with you, I haven't experienced much racism that was overt here in Green Bay. Like, to be completely honest, and my run-ins with authority here have honestly been really good. Even when I didn't know the Lord living here and was on the wrong side of authority, I believe that many of the officers in Green Bay treated me fairly. And I'm not just saying that because my brother's here and he's an officer at all. That's truly my experience here in Green Bay. Now, am I saying that things don't happen in Green Bay? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there aren't abuses of power or any of those things like that go on. So I'm not speaking for all minorities' experience here. I have had friends that have said to me that they've had difficult run-ins with authority in Green Bay. But for whatever it's worth, I can only recall maybe one time where I felt a little uncomfortable with the police here, and they were actually coming into a situation that would probably make them uncomfortable. So I was with my friend, my brother Albert, and we were helping his nephew get some clothing items and stuff from a house he was living in. Me and Albert are both saved at this time. We're both, going hard as we can for God. And we went over there to help him retrieve his clothes from his house. And these guys instantly wanted to basically fight. And so we took the role of the pacifists and we kind of ran from the fist and all of that. And the Lord was really speaking to my heart, like, don't throw a punch. As much as you want to knock somebody out, don't throw a punch here, because you're representing Christ. And so it was funny. The police came and they stopped all of the stuff. We all sit on the curb. And I'm telling the police, like, we really just came to get some clothes. Me and my brother are ministers. Like, this is not what we're trying to do. And the attitude from the police was kind of like, yeah, right. Yeah, everybody's a minister. Yeah, sure you. So I get it, though. I mean, that's a situation where you heard about a group of people fighting. So that's fair. And I think we have to be careful when we talk about these things, at least for me, from my perspective as a minority, to not make everything a race issue or ethnicity or whatever we want to call it issue. Because it's not. Every time we have a run-in with authority, it's not racially motivated. They have a difficult job to do, and I understand that. And so sometimes that's going to come out in a way that's not so happy or pleasing. I get it. But that's the worst that I've seen in Green Bay. Now, my experience in Chicago, completely different. Growing up in Chicago, even as a young kid, I was probably in my early teens. I remember getting robbed coming from the cleaners. I had some clothes from the cleaners. I got robbed by a guy. And called the police as you're supposed to. And it was just kind of like this attitude of like, whatever, dude, we're not going to chase this down. We're not concerned about this, like, whatever. And then just growing up in my teens as I started to drive and all those different things, it was not out of the ordinary to be stopped for what I didn't believe anything was wrong. I'm just going to be honest with you. There were times where I was stopped and pulled out the car, guns on me, the whole nine, just because I'm a young black kid. I can't say that those were racially motivated either. I lived in a dangerous neighborhood, but that's how I felt. And that's how it feels a lot of times when you're like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why are you bothering me? And so that was frequent. So I don't really even flinch now. Like, those things are a common place for me when I was living in Chicago. Even as an adult and as a saved Christian, I remember visiting a friend, and we were all driving in the car. It was me, Albert, and another friend of mine. We were driving through the city, and I don't know if the police had something major going on or something in the area, but we passed the police, and they were on their way to do something in a large group. And for whatever reason, they circled around and pulled us over. They pulled us over, and they instantly got out of the car with M16s. Not just handguns. I mean, they put M16s on us like we had just robbed a bank. And to be honest with you, I don't even shake anymore. I don't even flinch about that because it was so normal to me. And so they, had us get on our knees and basically question us at gunpoint before they let us go. And that's one of many experiences. I also shared with a brother at church when I was younger, being in Chicago. I remember being foolish, being stupid, still acting crazy. I didn't know the Lord at that time. I ended up going to the police station for something. So while you're in the police station, they put you in this room full of people from all over the city or that area, and you're in this big bullpen with folks. And I ended up getting into a fight with a guy in the bullpen. For whatever reason, I mean, it was years ago. I don't even remember why. But when the police separated us, instead of just putting us somewhere separately, they actually took me off to a different room, a different cell, and they beat me with billy clubs for about 5 minutes. I still have bruises on my legs from that. And I don't believe me fighting another inmate is a reason to get beat like that, to be honest with you. So those are just a few of many experiences to help you maybe understand what it's like sometimes to be me. I mean, when I get pulled over, it's maybe not the same for you, Chad. If I see blue lights behind me, there's not this feeling of they're coming to protect me. They're coming to help me. There's this feeling of, I hope this doesn't go wrong. It's the first feeling. Whether that's right or wrong, whether those are valid or not, that is truly the first knee-jerk reaction. It's like, this could be bad. And I don't know if everyone experiences that, but that's been my experience. Mm-hmm. So,
I think of a time where you and I went to a conference in January. We were in Illinois, and we were coming out of an elevator to go to a conference, and I think you had a hoodie on, and you're like, we're going to go through this cold stretch between the hotel and the conference center, and you're like, I'd like to put my hood up, but I don't know that that's wise for me to do that. And I think I said, that thought has never crossed my mind. And so that, I think just being with you, I've learned different perspectives that I don't have, right? And what about implications for your family? You've got 3 kids that all bear your name, but you got one boy that bears your first and last names. So does your color of your skin, does that have any implications, do you think, on how you raise?
That's a great question, Chad. I think, and I've mentioned this to you before, is every Black household, every single one that I know of, has the talk. And if you're not familiar with the talk is basically how to behave yourself if you encounter law enforcement. Keep your hands in sight. Say yes, sir, no, sir. Don't make any sudden movements. And really just sharing survival tactics is, I had that talk. My mom and dad weren't in the picture a lot when I was younger, but my great grandmother, being older and probably experienced it, she was from the South too. So she probably experienced way more racism and things than I ever will. And so it was important for her to speak to me about the way to interact with police. And I believe I have to have that same conversation with my children, whether it's right or wrong or whether we should. I feel more comfortable having that conversation, and more so for my boys. I mean, not saying that things don't happen to women. So my daughter, I have similar talks with her too. We actually had one recently since she's of age. Just talking to her about, make sure that if the police come up to the car, you have your stuff ready already. You keep your hands on the wheel. And maybe these are things everybody should do. But we make it a point to highlight those things in the Black community, from my understanding anyway. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, brother, I want to give you an opportunity to share your story. You grew up here in Green Bay, and I want to give you an opportunity to share your story of why you are a police officer, and then anything else you think would be appropriate to share. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Green Bay. Lived here the 38 years that I've been alive. And I was raised on the near west side, 2 blocks off of Broadway. Not that Green Bay is a big, bad city and there's rough spots, but Broadway would be a rougher spot. And I grew up, I'm one of 13 kids. And my dad drove bus and truck growing up. That's what my dad did. And eventually he got a job in the trucking company in admin. But for my younger years, Dad drove bus and truck. And then when I was born, that's when he started his journey into the ministry. So Dad was a part-time pastor for all the time that I was growing up, as well as the other jobs that he did. And I grew up surrounded by lots of siblings, and then in the neighborhood was quite diverse. I mean, there was a lot of different ethnicities that I grew up around in. I was public school for 4 years, and then I was eventually homeschooled. So that kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. But I was in early teens, and my brothers and I were playing basketball in the park, and we were approached by a cop. And this cop walked up and he wanted to introduce himself to us, and he went around and asked everybody's name and couldn't figure out how we all had the same last name because there's 7 of us that were there playing basketball. And he said that he is a neighborhood cop and he had a heart for the neighborhood, and he wanted to come back and meet this family that had so many kids that were there playing. So he came back, he met Mom and Dad, and I'll tell you what, that's not the first time Mom and Dad have had the police show up at the house. So the look on their face was priceless when the boys come walking around the corner and there's a cop right behind us all. And I won't say any names, but our parents had an idea of who might have caused the issue. And that began the introduction of who was my mentor, Dave. And Dave's heart was for the neighborhood. And he kind of took us underneath his wing as he started really what would be a ministry to the Tank neighborhood. That was his school, that was his neighborhood. And he started a running club, he started a community service club, and he started teaching a program called Character First in the elementary school, where he reached out and he had me and a couple of my siblings go in and teach him. And it was a Bible-based character, but because it was in the public school, you didn't mention the Bible, but it was biblical principles, teaching character, and that was a way that he had a ministry in the school. Mm-hmm. And that really lit the fire for me to be a cop in Green Bay. I've always wanted to be a cop since I was a little kid. You know, I knew at 5, I met a police chief at our church, and he sent me a little toy badge and his business card and a letter. And that got the hook for me. But solidified Green Bay was Dave and the outreach that he had in that Tank neighborhood. And watching him invest in a neighborhood and change the look of a neighborhood for everybody in it, where they shut down problem bars and they removed bookstores and they tried to involve the people and give them a pride and ownership of where they lived. And that was a done deal. I'm like, I want to work in Green Bay. I want to be like Dave, and I want to serve my community that way. So then I pursued a career in law enforcement, where I went to school for it. Had a couple of jobs before then, but that was my goal, and I would say it's a calling. For a lot of police officers, it is a calling that you're called to do that, and the mindset that I went in with it was, this is what I wanted to do. And I'll skip through a lot of stuff, but fast forward 10 years after I got hired, I got to take that job as a community police officer back in the same neighborhood that I met Dave in.
Wow.
And fulfill that role. I picked up the torch from him and I run that same community service club. And I still get to outreach and work down in those same neighborhoods where I met him and where my heart is to be to serve.
I think the reason I wanted you to share that is because it just speaks about your investment in the community. And you use the word calling, and there is a sense of destiny there, that from this you had a mentor and it's come full circle, and now you care for your neighborhood there. Yeah. And I think it's important to hear that In my experience here serving at the church, there's been students that have kind of worked their way through, and they have identified, said, I want to be a police officer. And I'm like, those people stuck out. I mean, they're like, I'm like, are you sure about that? and they're like, they are driven on that track. And that's what I've observed in the early stages of them. And I've seen that in you and the other officers I've gotten to know.
Can I piggyback on some of that?
Yeah.
You brought up a lot of good points, brother, when you were talking about the investment in the community. And in my community growing up, that's not what we saw, unfortunately. But I did grow up having high respect for police. Like, if they would come to the schools sometimes and do little talks and things like that and say no to drugs and whatnot. But actual community involvement was missing. We didn't feel in my neighborhood that we had a relationship with police. And I've seen places where that's true, where the police are actually on the street and know individuals. Like, I know that Ray over there is into this, but Ray's a good guy that can keep things calm. So, that type of thing wasn't happening. And so I think it doesn't make room a lot of times for that attitude of, hey, I want to follow this path, or I want to become. I'm actually surprised that any of the African Americans that came from my community that would become an officer, because honestly, growing up on the west side of Chicago, that wasn't my experience at all, and I wish it was. Might have changed my trajectory when I was younger too. But that was good. Thank you.
Roemon, back to you here. One of the videos that you had was of Pastor Lorits, and he was speaking about, I think, the people of majority are white people, and when an event takes place like what happened with George Floyd, it could be that white people want to just rush in and just do something, but what he was saying was, what you really need to do is sit down with a person of minority and just get a sense of, feel what that's like for them, and get to know them, and then from that, then work towards some solutions. So I want to give you an opportunity to speak to, what is it you would like that 86% here of Green Bay, including your church family, what is it you would like them to know?
I think you said it. You said it perfectly. It's get to know a minority. I think that's most important, is hear our experiences. I mean, now I'm going to be honest, for some black people, and for me even at times, it can be fatigue that comes from all the racial talk. And you probably heard the term race fatigue or race talk fatigue. And sometimes I feel that way. But because of my thoughts and everything else are informed by the Bible and by Christ and by his Holy Spirit, I always want to take the time to share anything that can educate, instead of just shut down and say, I don't want to talk about this anymore. So I do my best, and I invite those conversations and things like that. I can't meet with everybody for coffee and address all the issues of society. However, I am open to texts, emails, whatever, to talk about that. And I think talking is where it starts. And I've been telling a lot of folks as well, you don't have to say anything right now. You don't have to share anything as far as a meme or anything like that to show me or other African Americans that you support them. And that's my honest opinion. I believe sometimes it can be more harmful than helpful. Because if it's coming from a place that's not informed, then it pushes some buttons sometimes. And it's like, did you even research that before you shared it? And I think that's a lot of my frustration is we've got so much information available nowadays. We've got Google, we've got tons of books, we've got movies that speak to these issues, and I just believe we all should get our own education to some degree if this is something that we care about. I think conversations in the home are key as well. Not letting things go past. Even for my own example, sometimes when we meet with family members, with my wife's side of the family, as you know, my wife is white. And so sometimes when we meet with the family, it's not an indictment against them. I love them. But sometimes there's things that are said that are just like, that hurt. And it's like, it came from a place of ignorance, not hate. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing, is that some of the things are hurtful just because they come from not being informed. When I say ignorance, and it was never intended or meant to harm me. And a lot of the stuff that I see or take in, I try to remember that, and I go, it's really just because they don't know. That's not their shared experience to have these issues. So I have to give grace, and I think we got to give each other grace. It's a two-way street. When I hear something that I don't like, I can't assume automatically that the person saying it is racist. I can't assume automatically that they're trying to inflame me or do anything negative. I have to assume that they just don't understand the issue. And so I think that's key. And another thing that I've been saying a lot is, instead of talking about it openly out in the public without having an understanding, I said in one of my posts, I don't talk about farming because what I know about farming is laughable. I don't know anything about farming and animals and none of that. So if I start talking about that, I'm probably going to offend a farmer. Let's just be honest. So I think that's key. And then what the Bible says about mourning with those who mourn. And I think a lot of people haven't taken the time to just take all of that in that we saw and just go, man, that's terrible. Black, white, Mexican, Puerto Rican, whatever. That was just a horrible event. And I think as humanity, as people of God especially, we should just grieve the loss of life. Like, I don't care if you're black or white. If I see your life snuffed out, it hurt my heart to see that man recently. It was an older white gentleman who got pushed, and he fell and hit the back of his head and started bleeding out of his ear. And I'm just thinking, why would you do that? That was an abuse of power. You could, and it then didn't even stop to help the man. And I'm thinking, I don't care what color he is. He's a man, and he was hurt. Let's care for him. And I think a lot of that gets lost and convoluted in the race stuff. And so yeah, just talk to people who aren't like you, hear their experiences, and believe them when they say it. Because a lot of people are shocked when I bring up the things about how I've had dealings with the police and things like that. That's not our shared experience. So when I say those things, people, it's like, wow, really? And it's like, yeah, we kind of live in two different Americas to some degree that you might not have seen before. So that, and take some time to just lament and grieve and say, Lord, help us. Lord, why is this so? Lord, and go to the word and search it out and see what God says about justice. See what God says about these issues, apart from our emotions. So those are my thoughts on that.
One of the things that I've appreciated about you, Roemon, is that you have been very approachable through this, and there isn't a sensitivity. Like you've offered grace, and even if I come with a question, and it really is ignorance, and I don't know that it's a willful negligence. It's like, I don't know, help me, and you've always spoke to that. And even if I've said something that might not be the most appropriate, you've just offered grace. And so I hold that posture up as an example. And we're speaking here about African Americans, but in our community, there's a large Native American population, of which there's also a history here of coming into our European ancestry, as well as a strong Hispanic American population and Asian American. And so these things are transferable, right? And Drew, why don't you share a bit of what would you want, I'll say, the citizens of Green Bay to know about your perspective as a police officer?
I think that I'm not here to tell you how hard and awful my job is. I'm not here to complain about it, because that's a profession that I chose. And I went into that fairly eyes wide open, knowing what was expected of me. I think what I would want people to know is, as law enforcement, we get sent to situations where we know limited information. and we don't get to choose what calls we get sent. The calls come in, and it's my job to go out and to respond to whatever call comes in. And then I have to take the information that I'm given, and then I'm going to make a decision that could change somebody's life. That does change people's lives every day. It's not something I take lightly. And I know the co-workers that I work with, they don't take that lightly either. And I will say that I'm very blessed by the group of people that I work with in Green Bay. It's a close community as far as officers go, and we know who we work with. It's not a place where you can hide and blend in.
Right.
You work with those people every day. They're part of this community. So there's that ability to stay not transparent, but it's very visible. There's no anonymity there, and it's not like you deal with one cop and you're never going to see him again. We're small enough that you're dealing with the same people over and over again, and the same officers are going to be responding. So I guess for me, taking in that information, it's going to shock you when I say this, but people aren't always honest at the police. And a perfect example is the answer to the question, do you know how fast you're going? You know, I don't ever open with that, but you sit there and you're like, okay, do I tell them, yeah, it was 80, or do I it's like 70, or where do I admit? And I say that half in jest, but it is. You don't always get the full story, or you get a spin or a perspective. And
true.
It is very hard for law enforcement to come in, and now we have to make a snap decision based upon what we're given, what's presented, what can we prove, who do you believe? And then again, you're coming to make a life-changing decision. You know, you put cuffs on somebody, that's going to change their life. Even a ticket can change somebody's life. You're a CDL driver and you get hammered with a ticket, that's going to mess you up. Yeah. You know, and I guess the thing for me that I dislike hearing is when we're making a decision and the cuffs go on or the ticket gets written. The words, "You can't do this to me. You're wrecking my life. I'm going to lose my job. You're taking my job from me." And by, I don't know, yes, maybe, but it's not my actions that did that. It's your actions that did that. And now, as the authority figure, and you're being held responsible, that could be a consequence, but it's not me that's doing that. And I don't know I don't want that to come off sounding selfish or whatever else, but that's the, you know, that's a common thing that law enforcement hears. And again, I will tell you this, law enforcement's not perfect. We are flawed humans, and we are living in a flawed world. Mm-hmm. And I will never tell you that cops are perfect, that cops get it right all the time. I don't. And again, it goes back to a heart issue. And I could not do the job that I do the way that I do it without knowing that there's hope for those out there. That as a Christian, I see the fix to the problems, and I can see myself in the shoes that these are fellow humans. These are people that I'm dealing with. It's not a problem. It's not a race. It's not a number to get me down the street and onto the next one. It's people.
Amen.
And having the heart for people and seeing them as such. And again, the centering on God, but for the grace of God, there am I.
Amen.
You know, I would be just the same as anybody else. And that can change for anybody that I'm interacting with. And I've seen it. You know, I have seen that people, and I'm a firm believer that people can change.
Amen.
And we have a Savior that says that, that we can be changed. And just holding on to that perspective.
Amen.
That's awesome.
I remember doing a ride along with you a few years ago, and I'll never forget it. And it was just one night, and that's a night that's just a regular night of work for you. Well, let's go ahead.
It was one thing that I left out when you asked me the previous question. And I said it in a post, so some people who have seen my Facebook have probably seen this already. But I think another thing that we have to be careful of is avoiding history. I think that we do have a history in our country, and not necessarily talking about police, but we're talking about just the history of slavery, and then the history of Jim Crow and all of those things. And I was watching Selma last night about Martin Luther King, and I was thinking, this isn't even 60 years ago that all of this happened. And I think we can't ignore the trauma that comes from that either. It's not an excuse for anybody to go, hey, I can just be any way that I want because history says that you treated me bad. That's foolish. That's not biblical. That's not good. To think that you got a free pass to act crazy because history is what it is. But I think to ignore it or avoid it is a bad posture too. It's like telling and not to be crass, it's like telling a rape victim that was raped 20 years ago, you know what? That was 20 years ago. You should be over that by now. Why are you still thinking about that? You know that's done. And it's hurtful. And it's like, no, this was my experience. I was hurt deeply by that. And I still have traces throughout my life from that experience. So it's not fair to dismiss my trauma. And I think that's something we have to keep before us too. It's like, even if we're not personally, because many of the people living now aren't personally responsible for chattel slavery or personally responsible for Jim Crow. However, there are traces of it that goes through our society and through our thinking that is really what people are in the uproar about, is to say, hey, this has been going on a long time, and people are ignoring my trauma and my pain and telling me to get over it. And I can never get over it, because every time something happens, like the George Floyd thing, it's like reopening a wound, so to speak. And so I think that's just another thing to keep before us as we think about that.
Well, let's talk for a little bit about solutions here. And we'll kind of end with this. And there's a few different layers that we can speak about. Solutions at a personal level. I think, Roemon, you've taken some time and you've unpacked what some of that can look like. Listening, don't speak out of what we don't know. And maybe we want to do some reading, and I think you've done a great job of equipping us. I'm not much of a poster on Facebook. I'm not much for social media, but I've seen how it can be used effectively in the last 2 weeks by Roemon, and he's really helped. And if you're not on Facebook, I'll try to include some links to the sermons that he has posted or videos he's posted on the YouTube upload of this video. So the first level of solution is really our own heart, and you refer to that, Drew. And the ultimate problem in America is not racism. And you talk about history, and I agree with you. We need to know our history. I'd actually say we need to even go back further than the 60s and the Civil War and slavery. We need to go all the way back to the first man and woman that sinned, and that was Adam and Eve. And they wanted to be like God. And with that pride, there have been amazing implications of that, and the effects of that sin that are being felt today in innumerable ways, whether it's the way a husband treats his wife, or whether it's child abuse, whether it's alcoholism or abusing drugs, or racism, and there is the effects of that. And the great news here is Jesus came to identify with our sin. Amen. And one of the primary reasons he came is for reconciliation. Ultimately, this reconciliation between sinful men and women and God. But it doesn't stop there. It's also reconciliation between men and men and women and women and men and women. And so that is the hope that we have, is through the gospel, through what Jesus Christ has done on the cross and been raised from the dead. This changes our heart. And this is the change that we need, first of all, within ourselves. Mm-hmm. But the Bible also speaks about, for those of us who are Christians, we are not immune from pride. And isn't that what racism is? It's just to say, I am better than that other person who's of a different ethnic group than I am. And so even as Christians, and I'm speaking here of the 86% within our Green Bay community, we need to search our own heart and don't assume that it is not there. And then if the Lord reveals that pride of racism, to be able to confess that. But I imagine that's also possible for a person in the minority to pray that as well, right? It is. Search my heart and help me not to be that way.
That's right.
Towards one another. So that is really the hope that we have, is that Jesus came for reconciliation with us and God and with us and one another.
Amen.
But you've also mentioned, Roemon, and I've heard it in some of the sermons you've posted, of a practical implication. This isn't the first talk people have had. There's been thousands of these, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully there's some benefit from this, but what we really need to do is to become friends with people who are not of our ethnic group.
That's right.
Whether that's Native American or Hispanic or Asian or African American, right?
Yeah.
And so an intentional friendship to be able to see how they live differently.
That's right.
Other things that you think about in terms of that personal layer of how there's some solutions for us before we get to the family.
I think that we. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, and forgive me for my pause. In the doing part, we have to be careful because we don't want to align ourselves with organizations and things that aren't biblical. Mm. And that's something that I've been wanting to speak about too, is that, for example, Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of divisiveness that comes with even saying those words. And I can understand some of that. Now, the phrase or the sentiment behind the words Black Lives Matter, I think is not a bad sentiment. And it's not meant to dismiss other cultures. It's not meant to dismiss other issues in the world and say that only Black Lives Matter, guys. Like, forget about everybody else. And I think people take it that way. And it's like, nah, that's really not what it's saying. It's just saying that a lot of Black people have experienced some things in this country, and we're just trying to restore dignity to them by saying Black Lives Matter. Now, the organization Black Lives Matter, I've gone to their website. I've read what they're about. And it's not biblical. It's not Christian. They align themselves with all kinds of other organizations that have an unbiblical understanding and agenda. I would truly say that organization has its own agenda that does not align well with the gospel. So that's why I even avoid that hashtag or any of that personally. But I agree with the sentiment. So I think let's proceed with caution, I would say, is my first thing as far as when we try to figure out how we can help. Because we don't want to, as a Christian church community, to be pouring resources into something that Christ wouldn't be pleased with. So I would say do research on the organizations that you might want to support financially. And when you find one, that aligns with Christ, then feel free to, share your resources or time with them. I think as a church, I think what I see most in the doing, I just really feel like people shouldn't have this pressure either. I kind of said that in one of my posts. Like, if this is something that you don't understand yet, get some research in before you even engage it. I would say that too. Don't feel the pressure. You're not getting it from me. You might be getting it from a lot of other Black leaders and everything else, but I'm not trying to pressure anyone to stand up for my rights, so to speak. I think we have to take this first at a heart level individually, like we've discussed already, before we can even start talking about the going out part. And when you feel comfortable with a good understanding of that, then I would say try to support something that speaks to this. But that's as much as I have right now. I haven't thought through tons of solutions. I've just been kind of addressing the problem right now.
Well, there's always the safe path is always just to preach the word, right? And I'm thinking of the passage for tomorrow. I don't know if the sermon will be good, but the passage will be good. And that is where we're following through the story of how the church came to be. And last week we covered in Acts chapter 10, where up until this point, the gospel, Christians had largely been Jewish. And then the gospel went to non-Jews or to Gentiles. And we get to chapter 11 tomorrow. We're going to see the first challenge that takes place for these Gentile Christians is actually to invest in people of Jewish Christians. It's actually to invest in people that are different than them. I can't help but consider the implications of that. The evidence of the gospel working in our life is actually to be a blessing to others that are different than us. And so may we do that. And I think also in times where maybe not only individually do we need to repent, but there are times corporately where we need to repent. We're a part of a denomination that 25 years ago this month had to have corporate repentance towards African Americans and their role in slavery. And I think that was the right thing to do and the biblical thing to do. So I think as a church, just being sensitive, and I'm basing this on preaching that you've sent my way of just being able to as we fight for the unborn life, to fight for lives that have been born and for those lives to be preserved. Anything that you would add to that, brother?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so a personal, family, church, and then I think also as we think about our government leaders as well, that's what large part of the conversation is going on right now. And we want to be praying for our mayor. We want to pray for our chief of police. We want to pray for those in authority. And we also want to do our civil responsibility as well as being engaged in that as well. But I would say, let us first begin with our own heart. Let's first begin in our own home. And then as a church family, let us hold up the word of truth, because this is the solution. It is a heart change. And we need to do a better job of proclaiming that. Well, men, it's been an absolute honor to be with you. I appreciate your perspectives and just being able to share truth. And all of us are aligned in this agreement that the true answer here is found in the gospel. And we need to proclaim that, and we need to hold that out and see lives changed. Is there any concluding remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Just real quick, you touched on this about there's a pervasive thought out in society that Black people can't be racist, and that's foolish. I don't know if it's the best closing statement, but I would say for minority brothers and sisters, we have to guard our hearts too. This is not just about our white brothers and sisters fighting against that. We have to fight against it in our own homes too. Because I can also share an attitude with my children and with my family that it's all about the bad white people and it's all about the bad police, and it's all, this is a sin issue at its core. And so that's just a word to the wise, so to speak, because the definition has changed for racism from being power is added to it. That you have to be in a position of authority in order to be racist. That's not true. You can have racist, prejudiced thoughts and statements and comments if you have no power. So we have to avoid a lot of the traps that we can fall into in these conversations too. So that's
what I appreciate about the variety of posting is you've had something for everybody. You haven't, if I could use the word, you haven't discriminated against anybody in your postings. The preaching has been very forthright, directed towards anyone, no matter what color of skin. And so I've appreciated that. Well, let me pray, and then we'll shut it down for today. Father, thank you for a chance to sit down with two men whom I love their families as well, and be able to bring this stuff out of the light. And we thank you for the ultimate solution that we have in the gospel. And may we put these things into practice. Yes, it's helpful for us to talk. And may this serve as a springboard of being informed better, but may it lead to action where we are sitting down with people of a different ethnic group, whether Native American, Hispanic, Asian, or African American. And may that lead to serving others as well. May it lead to modeling for our children of saying, this is what we do. This is what the Bible says. We are all made in the image of God. Now follow my lead, and I'm going to call people out when there are words that are spoken that does not hold up the dignity of men and women. And then may we just boldly, lovingly come alongside it and share the hope that we have in the gospel. In Jesus' name, amen.